thank you all for joining us. We're here on the Data Strategy Divide panel, and hopefully you've had an enjoyable, illuminating morning thus far. I know I have. We have a wonderful panel joining us, some based in the UK. Nafi's flown from Senegal and indeed Paris to be with us as well. We will be introducing ourselves in a slightly, not unusual format, but an encouraging format. We have a lot of virtual guests, attendees from all over the world watching us, some of whom may be visually impaired or perhaps listening to us whilst doing other activities. So on Lee's recommendation, we're going to be introducing ourselves now. Lee, why don't you go first? Why don't you introduce yourself to us and those virtual leaders?
So thank you very much. My name is Lee Fulmer. I'm the independent chairman of the Bank of England's Strategic Transformation Board for Data. I am a middle-aged man with sallow complexion, greying hair. I'm wearing blue trousers and a tweed jacket. I'm about 1.88 meters, sorry, 8'4". I shrank, I had a back operation. And that's about it for me.
Hi everybody, my name is Caroline Carruthers. I was the co-author of the first book for Chief Data Officers called the Chief Data Officers Playbook. For my sins, I'm still writing, and I'm also the Chief Exec of Carruthers & Jackson, which is a strategic data partner. I am a 6-foot robust blonde, just to make sure I don't give everybody the wrong impression about that, wearing Scooby-Doo shoes.
Hi everybody, that was loud, wasn't it? I'm Claire Ducat. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. So here representing charities, but the RNLI, for those that are here internationally, is the charity that saves lives at sea. It's a volunteer organisation. And so I am here as an individual who needs colour, loves colour. And as with all of us, I absorbed the Zoom screen or the Teams screen when we're remote, but did discover once we got back in person and was at the bar with my team, and of course people have changed through the pandemic. When I left the bar, they said, "Is that really Claire? She's quite short, isn't she?" So yes, I am quite short. I'm 1.60 meters, and really pleased to be here.
Fantastic. And Nafi, last but not least.
Okay. So I'm Nafi, Chief Digital Officer at Free in Senegal, which is a telco operator. Been working in the telco industry for 24 years now. We started our digital transformation 3 years ago, starting the data one, because the role of the Chief Digital is evolving into Chief Data. So glad to be here and to exchange with technologies, the experts.
Wonderful. And I'm Peter Stjanovic, editor of Hot Topics. I am 30 years old, male, and I should have worn a lighter jacket. We are going to start with you, Caroline. We're looking at the data strategy divide, ethics, efficiency, transformation, big topics. But before we get there, let's look at the value of data. You have seen it all before. How has, in your own words, the value of data changed?
I have seen it change so much, which is actually a really good thing. And for a start, we're having these kind of conversations so that we're actually trying to figure out what the value of data is in a lot of organizations. What I would like to just get across when it comes to things about the value of data is it doesn't actually matter what method of valuation you use. What really matters is what the purpose of the data is for, because it does not have a purpose without knowing what you're using it for. I've seen lots of organizations fall into the trap of trying to think that every data has an immense amount of value and you have to treat it all the same. Some of it will be your crown jewels and some of it will be incredibly valuable to you because you'll use it in lots of different ways. But some of it is like the equivalent of yesterday's newspaper and you shouldn't really be that bothered about it.
Lee, I'll come to you next. From UBS now to the Bank of England, presumably the data has shifted considerably in that time.
Well, I think if we replace the word data with information, right? How many people here are old enough to remember physical files and filing cabinets? Quite a lot of us, right? So, you know, if you turn back the clock 20 years, we had a huge focus on data, right? You couldn't store everything on premises. You had to curate those files. You usually had to store them off-site. It cost money. So we knew what we had, we knew where it was, and we knew the value of it intrinsically. And I think that what's happened with the technology revolution and the reduction in cost of compute and storage, we keep any old shite, you know, and that's the problem. How many people here have actually, you know, have their first phone ever, their first smartphone? Right, none of you. Okay, sorry, one raised her hand there. I'm going to talk to you later. But the point is we back up our old phone and we put the backup on our new phone, and we carry with us a bunch of digital information that we probably don't need anymore. And we do the same thing in our companies. And I think to Caroline's point, it's almost like panning for gold. You have to sift through all the dross in the pan to find those nuggets of information. So I think what we've seen is a pivot from curation to keeping everything, to realizing that that actually is harming our companies. And now we're trying to get back to what is the important and meaningful data that we need in order to run our business. And it is a hot topic, quite literally, and no pun intended.
Just to pick up on Lee's point, and just to share something with you, because I do think that I would claim to have to cope with one of the worst problems of storage that I've ever seen. I was Chief Data Officer for Network Rail at one point in time for my sins. Apologies to anybody who had train problems this morning. I'm not there anymore, it's not my fault. But at one point in time, I had to cope with a bunch of Latin scrolls that we had stored in a cave. And I would challenge anybody to come up with a longer term solution than that.
Noted.
I think I'd give a different dimension to it, because of course I wholeheartedly agree with everything you guys have said. But actually, one of the things that we've been really looking at is the why, but also the access to that information. And actually, how do we make sure that the people that need the information to make decisions and to take action have the access to that now or near now, rather than actually needing to go and make it up, you know, with lots of different steps along the way. And therefore that leads to proliferation and problems that we all know sit behind it. So actually what we've been really focusing on as a charity, and giving our volunteers particularly that information about their life-saving activities, the real things that they need to help them. And what we've seen through that is by giving people the information back, sometimes it hasn't been accurate. So sometimes there's been information that we've been holding. I know we're all in surprise here and all of our data's perfect and clean, but actually by sharing that and having that openness and that transparency and having that conversation about where we're seeing problems with it, it's really helped change it, because people are seeing why there's a problem with the data not being accurate, what they need to do about it, and to improve it. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, but there's another piece for us right here, right now, which is that access to information and really making sure that it's relevant to the individuals that need it.
And I wonder how much of that is sector specific as well, Claire, just looking from the context perspective. Good point. Nafi, value of data, we've just heard a couple of different perspectives there. Would you add anything to what we've just heard?
Yes, maybe to say that, as I said, that it came with the digital revolution, data. We now have more and more data coming from different sources. The volume being big, we need to find new architecture, like data lake, how to exploit all this volume of data to be more business efficient. Previously, yesterday you were with CMOs. Now customers, they really need personalized experience. So to work on the data, to exploit it, it enables to improve customer experience, to automate also, you know, some processes to be more business efficient, to do some saving. So that's why it's really important not only to have a digital transformation strategy, but also to have a data strategy so that it drives business efficiency.
And I suppose it cements then the value of data or information to Lee's point within that transformation or continuous improvement perspective and management.
Yeah. So in terms of management of the organization, to be able to be efficient, there are different, like say, challenge. The first thing is, I think, data literacy, I would say. It's important to train the whole organization so that they know what do we expect in terms of data strategy. At different levels, The same way when you lead a digital transformation, you integrate new roles like Scrum Masters, product owner, and so on. But for data also you have new functions like data scientists. These are new competencies. So we need to not only train the employees, but also to integrate new competencies. You need to review the whole architecture. So the legacy architecture need to be reviewed. To do that, you need to have the validation of the budget. It's the same challenge as when you conduct change of digital, to make the sponsor, which is the CEO, understand that this is critical. We cannot work the same way, so we need to invest in platforms to be able to get all the data in one place and to exploit it. And last but not least, it's security. You need to make sure to understand that this whole volume of data comes with insecurity. So we need to have a proper security plan, and to have some ethics so that the data, this volume of data, does not go in unsafe hands. Yeah.
I think you've outlined there, Nafi, just how difficult it is to balance ethics, efficiency and transformation in a data context. But before we expand upon that, one of the key questions I get a lot in my calls or in roundtable debates in the past is accountability or ownership. So I wouldn't mind you just sort of explaining to the audience here where each of you believes data should be owned, or with whom, or how. I'm not sure who wants to go first, but it's a really important question.
I'll go first. So we've been on a data journey for the last 4 or 5 years as an organisation. And so just to step back, because probably most people think of the RLI charity that saves lives at sea, volunteers, think of our crew. Probably through the pandemic, people have thought about the lifeguards. They haven't thought necessarily about the fact that we manufacture the orange and blue boats, we maintain those boats, we have a phenomenal training regime to make sure our crew is safe to go out, and we have retail operations as well. So although we're a charity, we've got quite a lot of substance that sits behind that. So who owns the data? So we've put a structure in place now whereby we have data owners, we have data stewards right across the organisation. Originally, they were really GDPR data stewards, but increasingly they are now becoming those data owners. And with that, of course, comes decisions and decision rights and business rules, some of which people love and some of which people find very, very difficult. So what we find from my team's perspective is that we are tending to drive, to nudge, to lead my colleagues forwards with that. But actually, we're in a really happy place when we do have the organisation, my colleagues, truly owning their data. We do have a couple of areas, though, where there's more than one person that wants to own the data, particularly volunteers, because there's different types of volunteers. There are life-saving volunteers, and there's engagement volunteers, and then there are further volunteers. We have volunteers in my team, as an example. There are a lot of people that want to own those volunteers, and that presents its own problems, because, of course, what truly can the business rules be when you've got lots of owners? You can't have that set up. So that real clarity of who owns it and the true ownership rather than an ownership of a name is that powerful step. And we are on the, I'm going to say the journey word, we're on that journey with that, but we have made great strides on that over the last few years because people see the why. People see how powerful it is, and they see the impact it has in terms of the speed of them getting to the information they want if they're able to own that effectively. So that's our approach at the moment.
I'd have to back you on that.
You.
Don't worry, we'll disagree about something else, I'm sure. But I think definitely. The other side that I've seen as well is it's either everybody wants to own the really interesting stuff or nobody wants to own the stuff that looks like smelly newspaper. You have to deal with that. The only counter to it, because I fundamentally believe that the data ownership has to sit with the business and who's actually using it, keeping it real, but the processes need to sit with a head of data, a chief data officer, to make sure that it's kept up to date, it's relevant, people have the flows that they need to do. But I think often playing that kind of role, the most fundamental part of the role is making sure that those data owners feel supported and that they have what they need to do that role well.
Caroline, just on that point, you talked about exciting data. There's also boring data. An ownership of the data should include all of it, and I would imagine the boring data is just, if not more important. backing a business than form. So how do you encourage people to get behind the boring data in the long term?
It's not actually the boring data, because often people pick that up. It's the smelly data. It's the stuff that everybody knows isn't accurate, and there's an awful lot of work needs to go into it. And what you need to do in those kind of circumstances is find out who it affects more. So who really needs that data to be able to make decisions or do something with. And they're the ones that you need to make sure you put a lot of resources and help into, that we are going to fix this. You're not going to. I'm not going to stuff you on this horrible little desert island of horrible data and leave you there and it's on your own. But what I'm going to do is work with you, because you're the best person to lead me to fix it properly.
So I think there's not really a one-size-fits-all. And I'm not saying that to cop out of the question, but I think in my role as Chief Data Officer when I was at UBS in the investment bank, I sat in the business, not in tech. And I was accountable to the COO and the CEO in terms of what was required. To me, that was the right place for the ownership there. But having said that, when I was back at my previous bank before that at JP Morgan, I sat in tech. And actually, I still owned the data in tech, but I had a business sort of colleague that I worked with on everything, and I agreed everything with. So we've argued about this, and Carol and I were at a Data Leaders Summit last month, and we did argue about this exact topic, which is where should the CDO report? Because should it go to tech? Should it go to the business? I think a handy rule of thumb is to go back to the word information again. Whoever creates the information should be considered the owner of it and should have the accountability to ensure it's not smelly and to ensure that they define how it should be accessed. And actually, if you look at it that way, tech teams create data that empower the business and run the business. So they have to stop thinking about it as a data model or a data schema that they don't care about. And they have to think about how it's structured, how it's presented, and how it's accessed, the same way the COOs or the traders or the program makers or anybody else have to.
But this is where the disagreement comes in place, because that makes absolute perfect sense in that kind of scenario. But if somebody's using it, it's, I think, difference between the mechanisms for how it's created and used and who actually has to make decisions on the back of it. And I would probably err on the basis of the who has to make decisions with it. But trust me, we could talk for hours on this one, so you might not want to get.
But I also think the size of the organisation makes a difference. Because having worked for some very large global multinationals, you can be 10 steps removed from things, can't you? And so therefore, actually, that real clarity of that user or the creator, I'll leave you to have the debate. But actually, in a small organisation where you are really, really close to the impact of it, providing you're working in concert with that colleague, I think it's an easier debate to have.
But I think that's the exact word. It's working together. It really shouldn't be in any of these kind of roles one person sits and tries to do it in isolation. It really is about using all the different skills that you have in your organisation.
But I don't think I'm talking about necessarily the roles, right? So if I go back to my time at the BBC, much smaller organisation, the person who set the health and safety guidelines, which we were trying to put on the intranet, because just like your problems with the RNLI, you needed to get it into the hands of the floor manager or a location manager, right? And how do they get access to it? It's useless if it's only in the office. They were still the owner. Now, the owner was delivering that data for people on location or for people in studios, so they had to think about how they were going to get access to it. But you still want to have the person who is accountable for ensuring that the dog handler is certified, or that the person who has to work with children has had the right DBS cert done, because you can't put it then back on the people who are either accessing it, curating it, or building the systems to make it accessible, right?
Okay. So
I think this is just where the RACI model comes in.
We've got context. Nafi, from your perspective, would you add any basic fundamentals to what we've just been discussing?
Yeah, I do agree with all of you, but what I see is it's a change management. So it's important to have someone leading it, like a chief data officer. But then this person is accountable to lead the change, because it's we say data is the new gold. How can we monetize? How can we get a ROI in exploiting all the data? So important to have someone accountable, but then you can have roles and responsibilities that are spread in different organizations. You can have in IT for all what is technical, like in the historical data warehouse, to define what is the proper architecture. Should we go for a data lake or what, or something else? And you can have responsibilities in business units because those are the ones who will be using the data, marketing to personalize the offerings of customers. You can have other departments for the reporting and to take better decisions. But from my view, and at Free in Senegal, it's important what we do. We are not in IT or in marketing. I report, for instance, directly to the CEO as the chief digital, and I think it's make it more clear and it's more independent because we are a bridge between the technical and the commercial. So if you sit in the technical, the risk is to think as technical, and if you sit like in the marketing, then there is another risk. So it's important to be someone who is independent, who is leading the change and orchestrating, making sure that both talk, the technical and the marketing, the commercial.
Okay, let's say then, in an ideal world, we are doing all of those things. We've got the accountability sorted, we've got the nose peg for your smelly data, we've got the digital aspects all sorted, and Lee, we're all okay with you. Balancing the potential of that information to improve your growth, your profitability, your capabilities as a business, and the ethics, the purpose of your organization. Let's start with a yes or no question. Yes or no? Can that divide be bridged?
If you try and write a strategy that doesn't balance those things, then I'll just about guarantee you will fail. I think you have to think about all of those things, but I think the biggest problem I've seen when people write data strategies is they try and chip them onto some kind of stone tablet, never to be changed, put on the wall and treated like the Ten Commandments. A data strategy should be a living, breathing document because as your capability change, your ambition should change. When it comes to things like ethics, ethics are not set in stone. They are a reflection of what we as a society deem acceptable or good behavior, and we know for a fact they change. If you look at advertising from the 70s and the way it treated women, at the time, we didn't just think some of those advertisements were acceptable, we thought they were funny. Now we would be horrified by exactly the same kind of thing. So to think that things like ethics are static, you would be doing yourself a disservice. So when it comes to creating any kind of strategy, one of the first fundamental things you need to do is how do you actually build flexibility and agility into it?
And what would be your top sort of tip then, if anyone is making that journey now or actually retroactively looking to input flexibility into that?
The first thing is focus on the purpose. So what do you want the data to do? How is it going to actually help your organization? How is it going to create value? How is it going to solve problems? And break it down to that kind of simple language. And the other thing is to put a real focus on the people. So people should create the data, make decisions on the back of it, use it to tell stories. So how do you really set them up to succeed? Those are the two things that I would do beyond everything else.
I think that for us, working for a very purpose-led organisation, for us, we are all about saving those lives, and we won't let anybody be in need. If we're there, we'll help them irrespective of who they are. And our reputation is vital to us. We are only here because of the generosity of people's kind donations. And so we've got really clear boundaries on saying this is the standards that we'll work to. And so once you've got that purpose and you've got your boundaries, I think it's a bit easier. But in having worked for many for-profit organisations, you're then in a slightly different piece where the boundaries aren't necessarily quite as clear. And so I think, as with anything data, you're always forcing to ask questions that some people don't always want to answer, because business rules questions, people are having to make trade-offs. They don't always really want to make those trade-offs, but they have to. And it's kind of the same thing, that, actually really being clear on those boundaries. Where will we take this? What's the impact? What does that mean for us? How, and so on. And just teasing that out. You're not talking about the data, but they're really important questions, because once you've got them answered, you're then actually able to set your models up to work really, really well.
But you do know, especially in the business scenario, when you're having to make those trade-offs all the time, that outside influences will cause an impact on that, which is why you have to build the flexibility into it. And the way I tend to think about it is, if you think of a plane that takes off from Heathrow and lands in New York, it isn't a straight line. So they've got the eyes on the prize, they know the goal, but that plane is constantly course correcting. And if you're a senior leader in the data space, that's what you need to do, is make sure, am I still going to land in the destination that I really think we need to be in? And what do I need to do to be flexible, agile, and still serve the purpose?
So I guess I have a slightly different view in the sense that I think your data strategy should be an embedded part of your business strategy. And to your point, it shouldn't be set in stone because it needs to change. Nobody here would have their business trucking along lovely, doing great in whatever industry you're in, have some sort of event occur that cause your business to tank and still follow the same strategy. You'd adapt, right? So again, your data strategy is there to help support and grow your business, to remove the friction from everybody doing business within the company, whether it's the RL&I or whether it's, you know, the world's largest corporation. And it's there to help you remove the friction from your interaction with whoever your end customers are. Whether you're saving my life in the Solent or whether I'm opening a bank account for you, it's the same thing. I think the guardrails and the set in stone bit comes with the policies, right? And that's where you need to involve people from your legal team and your compliance team for your relative business to understand, you know, where are the boundaries? Because I think the boundaries have to be there, and that's where the ethics really does have to factor in. You mentioned commercialization earlier, right? If you're going to start leveraging some of this data for a different purpose than it was intended and repackaging it and selling it, that's not a strategy. The strategy is growing the business by creating new products or revenue streams, but the policy has to put the framework around how you do that.
It's a great segue, Lee, because I was going to note that in the audience we have CIOs, CTOs, chief digital, data, security leaders. Now, I know that in many ways roles obviously merge, depends on the company, depends on the sector. What, though, does the ecosystem of the tech leadership, the tech C-suite, mean for a data strategy? And in this context, of course, that balance between ethics and profitability, that, of course, everyone's thinking, but with different roles and the accountability, in your experiences, who does what and why and how, and you know, is there like a weird competition, or is it more collaborative? And I guess, what is the addressing points behind that?
I think it has to be collaborative. If you're in those roles in any kind of combative situation, you're going to struggle with it. I mean, I get asked a lot about the difference or the similarities between a CIO and a CDO, Chief Data Officer, and I tend to talk about the analogy of the bucket and the water. So the CIO is responsible for the bucket, they're responsible for it's made out of the right material, it's in the right place, it's in the right size, that it's safe, it's protected. And the Chief Data Officer is responsible for the water, where it comes from, where it goes, its purity, how it's used. Both of those roles have to be very symbiotic in nature, otherwise something will go wrong. You can't move the bucket and the water still ends up in the same place because it's going to spill. You can't double the size of the water without talking to the person that controls the size of the bucket. But I do think that we often get caught up in semantics when it comes to these kind of things. As long as you're clear, you agree, you talk to each other, you work together, I really don't think that it needs to be a confrontational type situation.
No, I agree with that. I think I've been fortunate in my career. I've worked in tech, I've worked in ops, I've worked in product and development strategy. I've been a CIO, a CTO, and now a CDO, and nobody can do it on their own. I use an analogy that, you know, at my level, nobody expects me to do the work anymore. They just don't. They expect me to make sure the work gets done, right? That's what we get paid to do at our level. And I often say that I'm like an orchestra conductor, right? So my tech development team is the brass section, and there's a first chair who is there to make sure that they have everything on spot and on message. The BAs are the woodwinds, you know, and so on. My job is to conduct them and to get them there. It's the CEO's job to give me the score and to execute on it. And if I don't have all my teams, I'm just a crazy man on a stage waving a stick. And I think we forget about that sometimes.
Nafi, I want to come to you next. You mentioned previously security. What we haven't also discussed is, of course, government regulation, where you are in the world. In Senegal, when you're looking at the data and its applicability to use for either your customers or your clients or your growth metrics, what are your strategies to manage those?
Okay, so for free in Senegal, what we are doing currently is to start even the strategy for data, because we just finished the digital part, deploying mobile apps, platforms, and so on. So we are just starting the data strategy to choose the proper architecture. You know, what architecture, technical architecture should we have to collect all the data, and how do we exploit it. But the challenge, just to come on what my colleagues were saying, it's how to collaborate to be successful. Because we should not forget that even chief digital, chief data are new roles. So you come in an organization where you have functions that are already set up, the roles and responsibilities are clear. CTO, CIO, they know what they have to do, CMOs. But you come to conduct change. So you need to put an environment where everyone will collaborate, and where you have an objective, a common objective, to be more efficient in an environment where everyone proposes same products and services in the telco. How can we differentiate ourselves to be more efficient, like to personalize experiences, to integrate innovation, because that's innovation that is a differentiator that will drive revenue. How can we innovate with data itself? So that's where we are. We manage also all what is security, because we have some risks, a lot of risk, and we are working on clarifying further all the roles and responsibility, legal compliance for the marketing also. The change we had with all the reporting was on IT, then it was moved to marketing, okay? But then data is not only IT or marketing, it's for everyone. So that's where we come and, okay, we do the change management and proper governance, what are our objectives, what do we need in terms of training, close the competence gap, integrate new talents, make sure that all the risk security is handled. We talk about ChatGPT today, machine learning, artificial intelligence that treat a huge volume of data from different sources that come with risk, but we should not only see the risk, we see the opportunity, and we work on mitigating the risks.
And yeah, I mean, we will definitely be getting onto those other digital innovation perspectives shortly, but before we move on to the transformative efforts that you're initiating or hoping to initiate, are there any sort of under-discussed perspectives or points around data strategy in terms of the basics? You know, you, me, all of us have been discussing data for a very long time. It's very difficult to get the basics right. It's very easy to focus on those commonalities that we all face. But are there any things that you've heard or seen or done, perhaps, that perhaps is a bit more unusual, that actually you think would be valuable to add into this conversation?
I think really challenging people to say, what is the insight that you're getting from this data is important. Because I think so many of us get in the habit of getting reports, getting steering group decks, getting Tableau dashboards. I mean, who doesn't love a great Tableau dashboard? That we kind of stop challenging what is it that we're trying to achieve. And one of the things I got very excited about when I started doing this work with the Bank of England a couple of years ago was their statement that they wanted to transform the way they regulated financial services by using data to do it, not by using reports. And actually, if anybody here else works in finance, you spend hundreds of millions on bloody reporting engines all the time for regulators all around the world. That to me was quite exciting. But I think it comes back to, I asked them several times, this is how I wound up chairing the board, right? It's like, what do you use that report for? And in one case, the Bank of England didn't use it. So we went to the ONS. And we asked the ONS what they were using it for, and it turns out they didn't use it. They were aggregating it with other stuff and giving it to the IMF. And it was fascinating, because then all of a sudden you realize the data you need to satisfy the bank is a very small subset of what we all thought we did and all the stuff we built up around it. So I would have to say, like, literally, just challenge. Don't ask what's the data, like what's the insight, what's the information that you're actually trying to get out of it, then figure out what data you need to make that business decision with.
I would add to that about independence, because I wholeheartedly agree, and I think many organizations are going through that journey of, do we really need it, and what's impacts it having, and where's it going, and how many people are involved in the creation of it, and what's needed. But also, when you're thinking about that insight that's there, it's not always welcome. So sometimes the information's requested, but it's requested because people want it to back up an argument.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't back up that argument,
Then they want different information.
what do they want to do with it? And so every organization will have its own structure about, we've had the conversation about where does the insights team sit, and does it sit within business teams? Does it sit within technology teams? Do they provide the information? Do they provide the insights? We can talk about that, but making sure there is that independence so that if that insight is really, really clear, it will be used is really important. And I think it's quite an uncomfortable fact that organizations will go through saying, is it truly being used? Or if it's an uncomfortable bit of insight, what happens to it?
So I think there's two things to pick up on that, because again, I agree. We're agreeing a lot. This is quite worrying, apart from us, but that's normal. And I think that when it comes to putting a data strategy or doing it, you can't assume that people automatically can pick this stuff up and work with it in that kind of way, because a lot of the times that they want to fall back on their instinct, their experience, because they know that works for them. So there is a level of engagement, education, getting rid of the fear factor around data that needs to happen in any organization to be able to move it and really use it properly, because often they're not using it for a multitude of different reasons, and you need to get under the surface of that reason before you can really start and get them to use it properly. And the other thing, and I think it's just worth touching upon when it comes to data strategy and the use of data, is that this is probably the biggest topic of the Emperor's New Clothes I've ever seen, because I'm in a luxurious position of working with a lot of organizations, and everybody seems to think that everybody else has got it right. And honestly, there are some amazing swan dances going out of there in some organizations that look incredible, but hand on heart, I don't think that anybody has 100% cracked the data problem yet.
Good segue, because I was actually going to pause. We've been speaking for half an hour, it's gone by very fast, and see if anyone on the floor had any questions for our panelists during that half an hour of basic discussions. We've looked everything from the value of data, balancing your security principles, looking at individual accountability. Before we move on to any of the transformative perspectives, now is the time to ask your burning questions.
There's a little part of me that thought, thank God someone raised a hand.
I'm hidden right at the back in the dark here. We talked about, Lee mentioned getting the value out of data and the value out of dashboards. How easy do you find the discussion of business outcomes from data and translating that at board level and getting real conversations going around business outcomes based on your data, rather than just pure dashboards and interpreting from there?
Personally, I've found it very hard. You have to educate the people that you're working with to try to get them to think differently, because I think anybody who's got a decade into a medium-sized company or larger is just used to reports, decks, things like that, and trying to challenge that is going uphill, right? And organizational behavior can take sort of 3 to 5 years to pivot and turn around, so it's not easy. But what I try to do is I try to, as Caroline said earlier, combine those aspects of the smelly data with the good data and the bad data in such a way as to figure out how to get some value for them. So I'll give an example, a real example, where I had a problem with some data for one of my trading teams, and they didn't want to clean the data because they didn't see the value to them in terms of how it managed their business. But it was causing problems for our risk team in terms of how they did the leverage ratio for that desk, right? So they were having to increase the ratio in order to hedge, right, based on the data that they were getting in terms of the timeliness. When I realized that, I went back to the desk head and said, look, if I could reduce this by X%, would it be worth your while? And his answer was yes, of course it would. But then that was about making him see the value of prioritizing the data for the right outcome, which was actually to reduce his cost of business. But it took me several weeks of sort of circular conversations to get around that. Once we did it, once we proved it, unsurprisingly, lots of desk heads came to me saying, could you look at ours as well and see if there's a similar opportunity?
The really simple way of thinking about it sounds simple, I'm going to give you the gotcha in a second as well, is just to be as tenacious as a 2-year-old with asking the why question. If anybody's got a child, you'll know what I mean by that, because it just is unrelenting. However, because of the level you're dealing with, and to be honest, you're dealing with human beings, you have to do it in a very skillful way so it doesn't look like you're being confrontational, but you're actually seeking understanding to help them get to the right place.
Maybe if I can add something, maybe to have a kind of, you have the data, but what is your objective? To define the use cases that you want to follow up. If I take, for instance, at Free, we had a churn problem with the customers. So we prioritize the churn management with the data to see what is the behavior of our customers, why do they leave us, and so on. So it's important to have some business objectives, not to just build a complex architecture for the sake of it, not to only work on reports, like you said, reporting, but have a common objective for the company. What are the use cases, what we want to work on, and tangible, exactly. It needs to be tangible, and of course, because you have a governance, you will monitor and see, okay, you have improvement, you may, because of the data, the information you got, you made a plan, and you see the improvement, reduction of churn of the customers, and so on. So it's really important to have tangible, you said, the use case. Yeah.
Any other questions before I move on? So we discussed elements of the difficulties of making sure the data's in the right place with the right people in the right formats, but clearly there's also lots of potential for change, in an optimistic way, exciting potential for change. We've gone through many transformations. I'm sure many of the people in the room are now continuously transforming, improving those initial transformations. So given recent news on new digital aspects, exciting innovations, potentials, where do you all see what we've just discussed as those basic data principles being utilized for a company's transformation or improvement efforts?
I love that we're all looking at each other, so I'll dive in with this. No, please.
Well, so we, from an institution perspective, I've often been repeating about this point that you said earlier around fundamentally you can't deliver from what the organisation needs unless you've got the information you need to have it. And then looking back and taking those steps back and saying, what is blocking us from getting that information? And we've all got the examples that sit there. Some of it is around those very basic data rules. Some of it's around the legacy infrastructure and architecture. Some of it's around our desire to not ask some of those awkward questions. But truly then understanding what is limiting us there then helps us to then say, well, how important is it to us? And how much effort are we going to put behind that? And I appreciate what I'm saying may sound very obvious, but actually going through that sequence and asking those questions and then having the conversation about how much money you've got, because different organizations have different sized pockets. And so different things will weigh in terms of that importance for them. And so some things they may be able to go super quickly at because it's so important and it will generate that much more money for them. Whereas other things they'll say will go later. Now, for us, we've been focusing on our life saving and being able to help make sure that all of those brilliant assets and our volunteers are supported as best as they can be. So that's been our absolute core. And we're now at the stage where we were talking just before about the fact that we're looking at, from a data perspective now, the information side, about 50% of people that drown don't plan to get wet. 80% of them are male. So we want to, important information, important stats. So we want to work with that 50% of people that don't plan to get wet, that wouldn't naturally think of the RNLI, and are male, about what they do, what choices that they make, how do they behave. So we're suddenly now stepping into a much broader information ecosystem into that behavior change with many, many partners around what that's going to mean from a do differently perspective for you, not us, we're fine. But you know, a good part of this population that's on this call, and what does that mean? So the basics, I think, are absolutely vital, but they just build and grow before we get into the complicated stuff.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so additionally onto that then, for the next 6, 12 months, what does that complicated stuff look like, and how are you approaching that, Claire? And then Carolyn, we can jump on.
I was just going to say, to build on that, because I think it's a really good way of looking at it, is that I'm seeing a lot of people, you know, hear about we've got to focus on the basics, we've got to get the basics right. And I'm not going to knock that as a starting point. There's probably some basic governance things, rule setting in organisations that you really need to get on with, because we haven't done it in the past. But if you think about it as solving a problem, which is effectively the way that you put forward, what problem are you trying to solve? And then you fix the basics to solve that problem, then you've instantly created a bit of value for the organisation, you've made somebody's life easier, you've demonstrated why it's worth changing and putting a bit of effort into this, and then what's the next problem and the next problem. And as long as there's some kind of coordinated effort, I'm not saying go Wild West and solve a problem over here and a problem over here, but try and coordinate them to get to a greater goal. But if you do that, what you do is you drop little golden nuggets all the way through this journey, so you eventually get to this nirvana that you're trying to get to.
And the new technologies and AI, we're dipping our toe. You know, we're very, very gently having a look, having a bit of a play, saying what does that mean for us? We're building more sophisticated algorithms within key areas that we need to have, but in terms of true AI, we're just very gently dipping our toe to say, what does that mean? So to the conversation we've already had around the ethical part of it, you know, there's vast, vast questions, there's very live debates on there, but actually what can it do for good? And where can it help us for good and for efficiency, then I think it's important.
And you guys won an award last week for Data for Good as well. And, you know, the RNLI did. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think it's an excellent example of how to leverage data in a positive way rather than just arbitrarily for change or transformation. Because I actually have to say I get slightly frustrated by hearing executives talk about digital transformation, because I keep trying to point out, particularly in finance, anybody in finance, there hasn't been people in a pit screaming out stock prices with pencil and paper like in 30 years, right? We're digital as we are. The problem is our systems don't necessarily talk to each other, because every department and every division and every business built up their own systems to move away from paper. So, you know...
Or we replicated what we did on paper in a system rather than think about a different way of achieving it.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, the person who was in charge at UBS when I joined, Andrea Orcel, was a brilliant mind for that sort of stuff. I will never forget being at the first leadership summit when I joined, when he said, we have 24 ways to book an FX trade. That's just wrong. There should be one. And then he told me to go off and figure out how to make it one, which in the end we couldn't do, but it wasn't 24. The number was like 3. And so again, it's about that. The transformation really should be about how do you streamline, how do you remove friction, not how do you bloody do, you know, ChatGPT or how do you do blockchain. Those are potential aspects of a solution, right? They shouldn't be the transformation on their own.
So if there's one take-home point, if I can be that arbitrary, sorry, Nafi. If there's one take-home point, what would you want to share with the audience, both in here and virtually?
I think it would be just to carry on what you're saying, to break the silos. It's really important to break the silos, because you cannot exploit information in silo. We need to group all the information to make proper decisions, one thing. And the other thing is in terms of organization also. It's a complete way of working that is changing. We need to work together, it needs to be collaborative, to have same common objective. That's what I would say as takeaway for any transformation, whether it's digital, data. It's the collaborative aspects, breaking the silos, changing the way of working. It's really transformation, and I tend to repeat, when we succeed transformation, it seems easy, okay, but it can be a failure also. So the most important is to manage people, because it will be people, how to manage the people, give them the competencies, communicate a lot. It's a lot of communication. Also to make people work together and to make sure that we meet the common objective of the company. That's what I would say. Thank you.
So I think, bearing in mind we're technology leaders, I would say my one tip would be, please stop trying to build massive data stores, right? We went from, data warehouses to data marts to data lakes, data lake houses. I call them data swamps. I think try to keep the context that the data was created in, because when you try to put a bunch of disparate things together and normalize it, you just wind up with the smelly data.
I think my top tip would be when it comes to any kind of transformation, you need to be able to create a safe environment where it's okay or celebrated to fail, because no transformation works without that idea of the potential for failure, otherwise you're not trying hard enough. And anything you can do to encourage curiosity from the people that you're working with is a good thing.
Thanks, Karen.
And I would add to that the obsession with the why is only going to stand you with good stead. But actually often talking about the things that you can't do because of some of those challenges may be more impactful for you. So have the positive why, but also think about the things that you can articulate, that not having the connections that you want to have, not having that simplicity limits, and hopefully the two will lead to happy harmony.
We do have a couple of questions from our virtual audience that I would be remiss not to ask. One of them is around the CEO and board. How can you work with the CEO and board who are data literate but not necessarily on your page or wavelength when it comes to the strategy?
How could you get into a situation where you haven't worked with them on the strategy? So I know that when I work with any kind of strategy, specifically data strategy, it's that board that I spend an awful lot of time engaging with and bringing them on this journey with me. So I would say if they're not engaged, you really need to understand why.
But I think you probably operate from a unique position in the sense that you're not native. So you're outside, so you get brought in to do it. I would assume that the questioner is in a similar position to, say, me, being inside the company.
I have been native.
No, I get that. I think that it comes back to tying it back to the business strategy, right? If you've developed your data strategy independently of some of your key executives, then you really need to flush it and start over, and you need to go back to them and talk to them and build it to support your business.
The other hint and tip, because you do get into the situations, is to really focus on the positive. If they're sitting around the C-suite, they've maybe got a little bit of an ego. Don't say that to everybody outside this room, but it's true. If you're sitting around that kind of top table, you've got some kind of ego, and if somebody else around that table is made to look really good and you're making them look good, there will be a little dent of that ego, and it will push them towards maybe being a bit more open to working with you.
And the next one is, given you're all data experts, what do you feel the impact, or how do you consider the impact of large language models and the rest of the technologies coming through on your businesses specifically?
I think, again, I don't see the impact specifically from new technologies, because again, I always try to take it back to the business process, right? What's the outcome that you're trying to do and deliver, and then how are you trying to use the data to do that? It's great when something comes along that makes it easier for us to do that, or helps expedite new insight. And actually, coming back to the AI discussion, I mean, we've been doing machine learning and AI stuff in banking for 20 years, right? Literally 5-6 years ago in my own bank, we were developing the equivalent of what is ChatGPT for research reports. So it's not really new, it's just more in the public consciousness. But when you get that bump where you can actually use it to help you develop new insights from data, that really can create that sort of leap in terms of your business. And I've seen that with some of the fintechs we've worked with.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all very much for your time this morning, and I would encourage all of you after the session, if you have any questions that sort of come through to the fore this afternoon, please do find them. I'm going to land you all in it now. Do find them. Like I said, the point of this event is to sort of widen your network, share thought leadership, and of course learn. So it's a big topic. We could have talked for hours. I promise you we won't. But thank you very much for your time.